What's up? How are you doing? I understand I have no views right now. Yesterday at least I had 3. I suppose that most of you who will ever watch this don't know me yet. So I think in order to do so, or let me just introduce myself. I'm Sasha. I'm a whistleblower. And I am going to stream now for the second time, because yesterday was my first test stream. I understand it's a bit of a weird combination for somewhat, or as partly an attempt to oh wow, I have a viewer. Hi, who's there? Wait, do I have 1 viewer or do I have 3 viewers? Well, let me just finish my introduction. I just wanted to make an introduction because I wanted to upload this one on YouTube actually. So I intended to make a welcome video for YouTube as well. Though unfortunately so far I haven't really been able to do it, but I expect it to be finished by the end of this week. So you can look forward to that. To explain why it is that I approach this whole thing the way I'm approaching it, I would suggest you read my story, which is, if you are on YouTube, will be as a link in the description below. And if you're watching me stream and you haven't really watched me stream yet, which is probably likely, except if you were there yesterday, I also urge you to read my story, which I linked in the panel below the stream. But without further ado, let's get to it. I kind of want to watch something more contemporary, so I think I'm gonna watch another video by the following dude. He was imprisoned recently and tortured in prison by the Ukrainian Secret Service, and he tried to flee Ukraine, but now he's imprisoned again, and all he did basically, as far as I can tell, was to if we can believe everything which is said in the video, and I only have doubts about very few of the things he said in there, that all he got imprisoned for was telling the truth.
Hey, how's it going? So, you guys ever heard of the term poisoning the well? Poisoning the well is when you put something in a well that makes it undrinkable. Or let me give you a different example. Suppose you have 2 barrels, one full of shit and piss, and the other full of this very fine wine. Now, if you take a little bit of the very fine wine and put it into the barrel of shit, it's still going to be a barrel of shit. But if you take some of the shit and put it into the barrel of wine, then the wine becomes a barrel of shit. That's basically what poisoning the well is. And so why am I bringing it up? In terms of information and the things that you believe in. See, the people of the narrative, the people of the ziggurat, as I call them, the entrenched leadership class that is cosmopolitan and encompasses just about all of the leadership of all of the major industries and the governments in the West, right? They have a vested interest in poisoning the well insofar as skepticism is concerned, insofar as people such as you and I who don't believe the bullshit. Now, yesterday I did a video about the nurse, right? And I talked about the ASH compliance experiment, where I said that the bullshit that they're spouting about the nurse, it's just bullshit, no different from the bullshit that they spouted about how Nord Stream was bombed by half a dozen people on a fucking pleasure yacht, right? Okay. Those people pushing those lies, they have a vested interest in poisoning the well insofar as people who are dissidents, presumably people such as you and I, because I'm most certainly a dissident. I have nothing to do with the fucking leadership class. Perhaps I despise them more because I got a really good look at them and I was raised to be a part of that whole shit show, and I want no part of it. But they have a vested interest in poisoning the well of dissidents by having dissidents believe things that are obviously foolish and nonsensical. And you, if you're a dissident, you have to be very careful.
Yeah, I can confirm that. And so the CIA has so strict me in a similar manner. I don't know exactly what he's gonna say, but if he's gonna say that you have to be careful with what you believe in that respect or in that sphere, because it can be used then very easily to discredit everything you say, then I wouldn't be surprised.
About that bullshit, that poisoning of the well. And let me give you a specific example. And a lot of people in my comment section are going to have a shit show. They're going to have a complete meltdown over what I'm about to say. But it's the truth. See, Neil Armstrong, he walked on the moon. There's no doubt about that. There's absolutely no doubt that the United States in the late 60s and early 70s landed, what was it, I think 4 missions on the moon. 4 or 5 missions, I forgot. There is no doubt about that. The evidence is overwhelming, okay? And you look at a picture, and I have a background in film. I look at a picture and I'm like, yeah, that was taken on the moon. It could only have been taken on the moon because of the technology that existed in the time and the way it's lit. It is impossible for those photographs to have been taken anywhere on planet Earth. They could only have been taken on the moon. And if you want, I can go through the whole rigmarole, but that's not important. The important part is that, see, there are a lot of people in the dissident sector who are pushing misinformation, and this is deliberate.
Yeah.
You got to
also most probably disinformation.
Let me give you another specific example, a recent example.
So what Fiona Barnett has outlined is that the information sphere around topics such as these topics, which the governments or clandestine services want to discredit, are full of disinformation agents who purport the same or similar things as the credible agents insofar as people like you and I, so as the credible people, but they mix it with falsehood. And one such thing, one such very similar thing is QAnon, because there's absolutely no doubt that satanic ritual abuses have been real, and there's also absolutely no doubt that Luciferianism and Luciferianism exists, and that the CIA took part in it. And part of the reason why I know is not only because I have experienced, not only because what Fiona Barnett has written in her PDF Eyes Wide Open has benefited me greatly in my understanding and my fight against the CIA, but also because when you look up, well, first of all, there are several independent sources which report the same thing, and in the recent interview with Jordan Peterson about with the actor and the guy who that actor has played in The Sound of Freedom, that guy has also reported purported satanic ritual abuses, right? And so that shit is out of the question. And then you might wonder, well, did the CIA have any part in that, for example, right? And then there are other sources which underline that exact sentiment. For example, the artist Kim Noble, who has dissociative identity disorder and who suffers from 20 different personalities. And if you look at her art, not only does she paint exactly the same things which Fiona Barnett has outlined, but also she has pictures, because one of her altars is a very small child, and presumably the one which carries the trauma. And so some of her altars paint, very, I'm not sure if it's the right term, but I think the right term was benign things, and they paint all very well. And some of her altars, so some of her personalities, are the ones which carry the trauma, and they paint, well, probably the most horrifying paintings I've ever seen, but equally fascinating. And not only does she paint the exact same things and settings and scenarios as Fiona Barnett has outlined, for example, but one of her altars has also painted such things as the American flag and the British flag and white lines and black dots splattered all across it, and written a Y with a question mark written in the middle. So you can bet your ass that they've had their part in it. And yeah, there are also other documentaries outlining how exactly what Fiona Barnett has said. Marcel Polter was his name. He wrote a book about that, about how the CIA had prostituted children to American politicians in order to have them be compromised. And well, just the gist of it all, what it all comes down to, what I wanted to outline here, is that social movements such as QAnon are just as other color revolutions, for example, which have been put into place by psyops, by organizations such as the CIA, are discrediting tactics to discredit the whole thing, just exactly like the guy who had exactly like the agent who was played by the guy in The Sound of Freedom also has said, those things are put out there in the world to discredit the real thing. So that when there is a social movement such as QAnon and they believe something which is real, which is that a substantial part of the elite, not just in America but also in other parts of the world, are infested with Luciferians who conduct satanic ritual abuses. So you make them believe one thing which is true, and then you make them believe a bunch of other things which are untrue. For example, that Trump at a specific date after the election of Joe Biden will become president again. And then that thing doesn't come true, and then everybody who believed the one thing now believes that the whole thing was bogus. So that's one way how discrediting tactics work and disinformation tactics work, and so many of them revolve around mixing truths with falsehood.
There are people claiming that the second plane in the 9/11 incident, the second plane never crashed into the second tower, that it was an explosion, and that the airplane that slammed into the second tower was CGI. And they've floated video showing this, showing a clear blue sky, and all of a sudden the building explodes. Now, there were literally tens of thousands of people who saw the second plane slam into the second World Trade Tower. There's absolutely no doubt. Now, why do you think that they're pushing this? Because to create that video that erased the second plane slamming into the Twin Towers takes a lot of effort. It's not an easy task to do, okay? It's not at all. Well, perhaps now with even more sophisticated visual special effects video stuff, it's easier, but still, it's very difficult. Why do you think that they're pushing that? Because they want people on the dissident side to spout nonsense like they never went to the moon and that the second plane didn't exist and it was all CGI. They want to discredit the dissident movement by poisoning the well. Because most of the skepticism of the dissident sector is justified. It's completely justified. I mean, a lot of times we see how the people of the ziggurat, the people of the narrative, push some bullshit, and there are dissidents who say, no, that couldn't be. You know, and a few months later, it's like, of course, it could be. It was a lie by the people of the narrative, right? But see, what the people of the narrative want to do is to discredit all dissidents. They want to poison the well by pushing surreptitiously in the dissident community things that are obviously not true, so that any dissidence is considered crazy conspiracy theory nonsense, like they never landed on the moon. Like,
yeah, I suppose that's also one way to do it.
Never slammed into the World Trade.
But you know, one way to float such untrue theories is to use disinformation agents, which connect with the real dissidents and spread such disinformation and nonsense. And so you see a lot of this particular strategy with targeted individuals, for example. So if you search the web for targeted individuals, you will find a lot of bullshit. And that is to discredit the real targeted individuals. And I interacted with one such, like, without a doubt, such disinformation agent personally. Also, you can find that in the second video of my other channel. I outlined that a bit. And yeah, I'm also gonna make a video about that in the future, how the whole thing plays out and yeah, what the deal is with the whole targeted individual thing. But you can spot the fake websites and so on very easily because, you know, they exaggerate things quite a lot, you know, with like extreme burn marks and stuff, and you can count on the CIA and the DoD not to implement such tactics because they leave marks, you know, so they leave evidence, so they would never do that, I suppose. But what they would do is shit that can't be traced, and you can bet your fucking ass that they're gonna do that because, well, one way to look at it is that the whole system is shit, you know.
It's to their advantage. Because by poisoning the well, they can discredit all dissidents. And so you have to pay very strict attention to people on the dissident side who are spouting things that are obviously nonsensical. When somebody says that they didn't land on the moon, I just automatically discount them. And anybody in my comment section who says that I'm wrong, that I'm this and that, the other, fine, motherfucker, I'm just gonna block you. I mean, simple as that. Because you're spouting a lie. And here's what's interesting, to go back to the Ash compliance experiment. See, people in the dissidents and the dissident side, when they start realizing there are all these lies that the people of the narrative, the supposed leadership of the Western democracies are spouting lies, these dissidents, they say, that's a lie, what they're saying. And so I'll align myself with the dissidents, but the dissidents also have these ideas like, you know, the second plane never slammed into the World Trade Towers, you know, they never landed on the moon, you know, Elvis is still alive, shit like that, right? And so they themselves, those who gravitate to the dissident side, find themselves, by the Ash compliance experiment, all of a sudden like nodding along, yeah, they never landed on the moon, when they did.
Yeah, the problem also with the whole thing is that it's extremely difficult to navigate that space, you know, because so I have also recently made an active effort to become more careful, you know, because like the last half of the year where I fought the CIA before I went into my hunger strike, you know, I completely bought into the false narrative that they successfully made me believe in, and you know, discredit myself extremely during that time. But thankfully I have you know, come to recognize that afterwards, and could put it right in the Facebook post that you will find in the link in the description down below. But also so one I can give you one such example, which is a bit of minefield for me currently, which is what's been happening in China and in Hawaii, for example, right? So one thing is obvious, okay, so like the thing is, even him, you know, so his video for which he got imprisoned for in Ukraine, the Ukraine conflict primer video, you know, that is an extremely good video, and I can tell in part because again I know that at least some information in it must be true, because I have watched credible documentaries outside of that which can confirm that. For example, what he reported on the or purported on the color revolution in Ukraine. If you watch the documentary Shadowgate by Millie Weaver, you know that that's true, and that is also a very eye-opening documentary with regards to psyops and how they function. And you know that there are two people speaking in that documentary who were responsible for creating the programs or the or told lies for those psyops, you know. So like that's a really good documentary, and Millie Weaver got arrested by the FBI. I think it wasn't the day after, but I think it was even the same day that she posted that documentary, you know. And it's like, and as far as I know, they didn't really have any credible charges against her. So, you know, we don't really live in a democracy when people like him and her get imprisoned and he gets tortured and I got tortured and so on and so forth. And you know, maybe he's getting tortured again in the Ukrainian prison, and maybe I get tortured again, you know, physically that time at some point in the future, and maybe someone else, like my mother, is getting tortured as well, like the CIA has been threatening me all along, you know. So, and you know how they tried to imprison Trump, and you know, just throw one lawsuit after another at him, and even the recent indictment of accusing him of several charges of conspiracy, which is exactly what they would do if they want to discredit any conspiracy theories against themselves, you know. So like, you know, we're not really living in a democracy anymore, and it's really fucking sad. And you know, there are a lot of other issues also tied to that. And yeah, you don't really know what to say about those things anymore, to be honest. It's yeah, quite hardcore. And as he has outlined also, you know. So like, what I wanted to get back to was not necessarily, but when I started, after I came out of my, I think my rehab was at that point, I'm not exactly sure, maybe it was also the psychiatry I was put in when I went into my hunger strike. afterwards I watched a video by TLDR News. And at that time they still reported on these things, and now they don't do it anymore. I don't know if they have been reprimanded by any sort of government or if they had just said, like, it's getting out of hand, But they had reported on several anomalies, let's say, which happened which too many to be merely coincidental, of sabotage attacks which happened all over Europe, basically. It became kind of clear that, those are covert operations. Now, it's not 100% certain, but you can imagine that, instead of asking yourself if these things are true, you should ask yourself, why would they not be true? So like, why would not Russia use undercover agents or any other undercover measures to retaliate or put pressure against Europe and the West and US and so on and so forth? Why would they not do that? And that's exactly what clandestine services are for, apart from the intelligence gathering, And so in the light of that, so many things have happened in the last half a year or so which are quite eyebrow raising, all the wildfires which broke out in the forests like Canada and US and Greece and so on, like half of Greece, not really, but I'm exaggerating, but like all those forests on fire in Greece, it's like, how do they catch fire all of a sudden? And not only that, but an airplane carrying two Air Force pilots just crashes out of the blue, right? And well, you can see how one of the wings scratches a tree and gets blown off, but it only did so because it got crashed beforehand, and so you wonder how and why, and to me it is very clear that at least a percentage of all these phenomena must have been carried out by secret services, by Russia or China, for example, And, and then some things happen which, like, for example, the Hawaiian forest fire, where on the same day, coincidentally, the electricity fails so that the alarms don't go off, and only weeks before there had been reports by the American government that Chinese malware had been detected in, I think it was in the military sector, with the intention to disable infrastructure elements like electricity. And so I don't know if I put that verbally completely right with the jargon, but you get what I'm saying, okay? Okay, and you think, why would not any kind of state actor be behind that? We don't know, but there is a decent chance with all of these reports that such things can happen. And then, you should also ask yourself what I mentioned yesterday. It is common wisdom that the militaries and the clandestine services, when it comes to technological advancements, are several years, if not decades, more advanced than the general public. And one rule of thumb is, for example, 10 years. So you can imagine, and also like all the militaries, the super militaries have now departments which solely focus on space, right? So you can bet your ass that the directed energy weapons, for example, exist, and if they exist, and if they'd be used for war purposes, why not apply a decent chance that the Hawaiian forest fires were caused by, for example, the Chinese or whatever, So it's plausible, that's the least that we can say about that. And what has happened in China over the last couple of weeks, if anyone doesn't know, is Beijing had the biggest flood into seen since at least 140 years. And the Chinese government is obviously lying about the numbers, and for some fucking reason which I don't understand, maybe it has legitimate reasons or not, any foreign news have only reported for it the day it happened, basically only parroted the official death toll numbers of 21 people or whatever, when it's abundantly clear that at least several 100,000s of people have died so far of the floods, okay? And so you wonder, could military agencies like from the US have played their part in that? And then you'd say, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. And then what you should ask yourself is, why would it be a conspiracy theory? The problem is like with 9/11, exactly the two examples he points out, right? 9/11 and the landing of the moon. So those are some of the, and I don't think it's a coincidence that that's the case, just as he points out, those are some of the most popular conspiracy theories out there, and those are exactly the theories or the kind of theories which are responsible for any kind of even remotely similar theory which comes up in the future getting discredited immediately as quote-unquote conspiracy theory. And especially because the problem is, even if you're stupid as fuck, even if you have an IQ of whatever, below 90 or whatever, sorry if that was offensive to some, but even if you're stupid as fuck, people lie under the conception that if you're intelligent, you automatically disregard any such theories, because no intelligent person believes in such theories. But what it actually does is not believing in such theories does not automatically make you intelligent, but people act as if it does. And the contrary is the case insofar that you don't apply nuance and healthy skepticism and realistic thinking and offer yourself up as easy meat for those kinds of people who are intelligent enough to conduct those kinds of operations. And so, with regards to the Beijing floods, for example, I don't know, I can't tell. But what I do know is that weather manipulation exists. You can look that shit up if you want, okay? So, weather manipulation methods exist, and I don't know in how far technologies exist which are capable of weather manipulation, because I'm not particularly knowledgeable, educated, or competent in that field. But I would guess, with all the technological advancement that the US military, for example, has, that they are in possession of such technologies, And so, not only has there been the flood in Beijing, but also several buildings, like 4 apartment buildings or high-rise buildings in one city in China apparently catch fire on the same day. It's like, what the fuck is going on? And people wonder if it's arson, and things like that have happened quite often in China very recently, okay? And then you'd wonder, well, if it's arson, then why wouldn't the American military, for example, be behind that? If that's the game they play, if that is how war plays out in the 21st century, where the public is kept oblivious and so not to disturb the economies and the social and world order and world peace, at least in theory, and so on and so forth, and with all the clandestine technologies that the militaries and secret services have developed during the Cold War in the last 70 years or whatever, why would things not play out that way? It's the question that I would like to put forward and like to make people think about, So but those are the kinds of topics which I try to be careful around currently, because the problem is I don't know. And another problem is that the whole landscape of information and this topic is so extremely complicated that nobody has a full picture of things. Not him and none of the other sources which I get some information from around several topics, And so everybody is walking around in the dark to some extent. So everybody's prone to speak some bullshit to some extent, And what I would like to say with regards to that is, first of all, be smart about any sort of information you get delivered, and also, but don't disregard someone only because 1 out of 10 things, maybe even 1 out of 5 things they say is likely not to be true. Because none of us can tell for certain about everything which is going on currently with all the secret operations and the whole dictatorship like states that are Western societies are currently devolving into, with the infringements on freedom of speech and dictatorship like moves which are being pulled off left, right, and center. For example, all that war and indictments against Trump, which where's the difference? They simply try to pull any sort of halfway legitimate, not just halfway legitimate, but they try to exploit the tools in their possession, and I'm sure not fully through entirely legal means, to get rid of their political opponents, the deep state in America currently. And the EU has only recently, on the 25th of August, passed a law with which they can take down any material on the internet which they deem misinformation, so that's how you know how democracy and freedom of speech, like democracy, just breaks down. Because first of all, every time such things have been implemented in the past, they've been abused, and second of all, who are they to deem what misinformation? If I said one wrong thing during this video, for example, then it might already count as disinformation and they could take it down. But there doesn't need to be such evidence, because the article about the supposed not bombing, well, bombing at the end of the day, right? About the explosions of the Nord Stream pipeline having been conducted by the CIA and the American government. That article has been taken down now by Facebook, right? And like, because they deem it misinformation, and like, are you so sure about that? You know, who the fuck can tell if it's misinformation or not? And I would bet my ass that it's true. But one thing which is worrying about that is that it is also evident that Seymour Hersh, the guy who wrote the article, has appeared a lot on Chinese television, which is not conclusive though about him being like a shield for Chinese propaganda, for example, such as some people claim. Because he might just be, he might just be oblivious about, well, that sounds kind of unrealistic, but it's still a possibility, I suppose. I can't tell, nobody can tell everything 100% accuracy currently, but, people have also appeared on RT en masse before the war and so on and so forth. And to some people, it's simply not that obvious that the Chinese media is any much worse than the Western media, for example. Because the Western media is also full of shit in all sorts of places, or all the time rather. It's like, if you're fed the news by the news feed which YouTube puts out on you, which you can't even customize for whatever fucking reason, you're only supposed to get the news that they are feeding you, It's like, every time they make a story about Trump, they are biased as fuck, Welt news. You can tell, right? And by the way, I'm not a Trump supporter or fan. I would only welcome to see him become president, because I know that he might be the only person in the whole of Washington who is not compromised by the American deep state, right? That is why I have an interest in him becoming president, especially in today's times. Even though it's also not completely obvious to me that he's completely competent, let's say. Well, I kind of forgot where I was at, to be honest. But yeah, right. So, it is very well possible that the Nord Stream pipelines have been bombed, let's say, for lack of a better word right now, by the Americans. You might ask yourself, who the fuck else would actually otherwise do that? Really, otherwise it would be the Ukrainians, for example, maybe, if they had the expertise to do it, which I doubt, but I'm also no expert. But the Americans seem extremely plausible to me, because they obviously have at least as much of an interest as the Ukrainian in this war. So why would they not do it? And Facebook has taken down that article now. So, and where is the evidence? Where are the facts for that article having been wrong, factually? Where's the evidence for that? And so where is the justification for the taking down of that article? And so now the EU can do the exact same thing, which is great, Awesome. That is how democracy lives on. And in their minds, maybe it's only supposed to go so long as the war continues, but what kind of attitude is that? Are we all supposed to become dictator states in order to win this war? And well, there's no justification for this war really anyway. So yeah. So those were my 2 cents regarding this subject, and let's continue watching this video.
You see? And so, if you're on the dissident side, unfortunately, you're always going to have to be on the alert. On the alert for the lies being spouted by the people of the narrative and by the surreptitious lies that the people of the narrative are pushing into the dissidents community to discredit it, to turn this barrel of wine into a barrel of slop. It's very important that you do so. It's not enough to be part of the dissidents community or the dissident side and just agree with everything that the people on the dissident side say. Oh no. You have to use your critical faculty all the time. That's the cost of dissidence. You can't just take something at face value just because somebody on your side says something. Not even me. Lots of times I'm wrong. I don't have a problem with that. Sometimes I think one thing, and then with more information, more accumulation of different data points, I realize, oh no, it's something else.
So one thing which I would like to say about this guy up front is that it seems to be relatively clear to me that he's biased in favor of the Russians and the Chinese. Maybe not too much, as far as I can tell. I cannot tell completely because, well, he's in prison now, and I cannot ask him, I cannot write any comments. The reasons why I believe that is that many of the things, in fact, most of the things he says, at least 90%, you can boil down to non-partisanship with integrity, because if you are a person with integrity and who's oriented towards the truth no matter the cost, you're not afraid to say things like Putin is a very capable leader, which is what he has said, for example, or that Putin is an ethnic nationalist. And if you want more context behind these statements, then you have to watch his video, the Ukraine conflict primer, because if you just take these words out of context, then you can build a superficial impression on what I just said and then, judge prematurely, and you shouldn't do that. You can do that, but what has alarmed me personally is when he said that Serpent ZA and Laoway86 are spreading lies about China. And that has not been obvious to me at all, to say the least. It is also obvious to me that those two guys are extremely, I don't know if extremely, but significantly or obviously biased towards America, for example, because, well, I think it's because they are at least Sorbentia is too unexperienced yet with regards to America. For him, he grew up in South Africa and he grew up with Hollywood movies, and to him the US is simply like the good guys, and so I think he views things in a black and white kind of manner, which in this antagonistic kind of manner where the Chinese and the Russians are the bad, or the Chinese are the bad guys, for example, and the US are the good guys, and what do you learn if you've been around enough in well, let's say the dissident sphere, but if you have simply had enough experience with this information sphere surrounding topics such as the CIA, that what is actually the case is that, and this is not supposed to be a reductionist statement, is that am I still on film? No. Okay, well, it is what it is. Unfortunately, it has not really captured me while I spoke all this time. But I suppose I'm gonna make a comment on my YouTube video to make you guys aware of that. 1 second, please. So this is not supposed to be a. Is this thing updating though? Moment. But at least now it is. Now it should be. Gotta be really careful with my thing here. Okay. Is that at the end of the day de facto, as simple as I can put it? The US only really has surface integrity with regards to Secret Service, foreign policies, military, and so on, you know. And the reason why is that, well, first of all, you know, they're as dumb and ignorant and incompetent as all of us, and lived without God, let's say, for the last 80 years or so. Not 80 years, but what I want to get at is that I also lacked the orientation during most of my life to know the value of truth and honesty and integrity and so on and so forth until I watched my first video of Jordan Peterson, you know. So I don't try to be too judgmental towards anyone else who lacked that kind of resource in the past, because, well, for obvious reasons. So it's just not surprising to me that people would act without integrity or criminal or amoral, for example, if they lacked sufficient orientation in their lives, because, well, to put it shortly, I'm gonna explain that in another video which I'm going to make in the future, the fully logical, the logical and even rational theorems behind belief in God, how that has to do with your value system and mythology and so on and so forth. But essentially it is difficult to, and I'm not a Christian particularly, by the way. I'm not Christian or anything. I simply believe in God, but I don't believe in a specific God, you know. But I have my own set of values, which are like the most important to me. At the very top is truth, and somewhere below that is authenticity, for example, you know. Anyhow, it's difficult to be properly oriented, be properly oriented enough to be moral if you don't believe in God. And I think for the most part of the last centuries, probably, as far as I know, but people have abandoned their belief in God for obvious reasons, you know, but that has with that came substitute beliefs, like, for example, Luciferianism. And anyhow, I'm sorry, I swayed off the point. What I wanted to say is that the US military and secret services and politics, etc., are all non-corrupt on the surface because the US is built upon Judeo-Christian values and liberal values and democratic values and so on, and that is solid. But beneath the surface, the US is playing the same game which everyone else on the international stage is playing, and that game has no rules, essentially. Because if you're a gamer, for example, you know that at the end of the day, everything which makes you win is permitted. If you don't exploit and make use of everything at your disposal to win, you're going to lose. And the US has become better at that game in the context of deceptive tactics, deception, lies, manipulation, and psychopathic tactics than anyone else in any other country on earth, because they had to keep their cover on the surface and be extra proficient and effective at their covert operations and tactics and so on and so forth, and policies and so on and so forth beneath the surface. So they had to learn more than any other country, as the superpower especially, to be deceptive, because they had to deceive their own citizens and the rest of the democratic world to keep a certain degree of facade up. But beneath the surface they did, they've been doing all kinds of shit, like, for example, prostituting children to the politicians, for example, And, that's the US, And it's the same US which has driven us now into this war with the East. And if you don't think that it's the US which has driven us into a war with the East, then you are nothing but uninformed. And you should get yourself informed. For example, you can watch this video by this guy on the origins of the Ukraine conflict, which I have outlined before, and another video which you might want to watch is this video, which has been uploaded 7 years ago, when the conflict between the Ukraine and Russia came into development, and a few years after, Russia has annexed Crimea, which they only did in succession of the West causing a color revolution, or America causing a color revolution. Okay, something just ducked out of one of the talking place. I have to make sure. Okay, you can still hear me, but you can't see me. Okay, I'm just going to continue this sentence to the end, and then I'm going to change my battery, my camera battery. the annexation of Crimea has only come about because the US has caused a color revolution in Western Ukraine in order to put a pro-Western, pro-American government in place in the Ukraine, and also because plans have been announced by the Ukraine, or intentions have been announced by the Ukraine, not only to join NATO but also to develop, as far as I know, nuclear weapons. And so you might want to ask yourself, if you're Russia, what the fuck would you do in that situation? You know, because Ukraine is right at the border. Even Bill Burns, the head of CIA, has been known all along that Ukraine is the red line for Russia, which the West ought not to cross if they don't want conflict with Russia. And which is nothing but understandable, because for example, that the US did everything in their power to prevent Cuba, for example, to develop a Russian base there, and yeah. So let me just change my camera battery for a moment. Okay, so my camera works again, sorry for this inconvenience. Yeah, so, I think we're entering dark times, and yeah. Not only because I know for a fact that the CIA is in possession of brain cloud interfaces, and that enables them to build a complete totalitarian state whenever they wish so. Okay, so let us continue watching that video till the end, I suppose.
Hey, how's it going? I just agree with everything that the people on the dissident side say. Oh no, you have to use your critical faculty all the time. That's the cost of dissidence. You can't just take something at face value just because somebody on your side says something. Not even me. Lots of times I'm wrong. I don't have a problem with that, you know. Sometimes I think one thing, and then with more information, more accumulation of different data points, I realize, oh no, it's something else. I don't have a problem with that. And you guys who have been following me for a while know me well enough, at this point I would suppose, that you know I do not have a problem discounting some idea that I used to have that I no longer have because the information has changed, I've learned more information and so forth. And so
yeah, unfortunately that also happens often enough.
You who are on the dissident side, you have to understand that you cannot take everything from the dissident side as the gospel. You always have to be questioning it. And you have to be very, very careful of anybody who's spouting something that you're like, no, that's bullshit. It can't be. Because if you don't, you're going to fall for the trap that the people of the narrative are pushing, which is to discredit you. That's the whole point of it. You know, the whatchamacallit, the Armstrong thing, the moon landing. I find that particularly noxious. See, because people today don't realize that 50, 60 years ago, when John Kennedy said, oh, we're going to go to the moon and all that, it was a tremendous effort. There were thousands, millions actually, of people who were involved in the effort to get to the moon. The lines of code, the technical diagrams, which of course existed before any computer-generated imagery, it had to be drawn by hand. You know what? All that is just bullshit that they just did it for funsies, huh? And Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing, which is just stupid. It's stupid because if you look at 2001 and you compare it to the actual footage from the moon, it just doesn't look anything alike. And again, they went 4 or 5 times, I forget offhand, right? Okay, so they went 4 times. Maybe once, maybe they could have faked it, but 4 times? Huh? But you see the point of these dissidents who are pushing lies. It's to poison the well. And the thing, too, that's deeply troubling, of course, is that these dissidents, they have fallen into the desire to comply with the other dissidents. You have to be very careful. Don't let them fool you with lies. Always have independent judgment. And whatsoever crosses your path, you have to examine it ruthlessly to see if it's true or not, if it's credible or not, if it makes any fucking sense. And, you know, basically you have to trust no one. Because, see, the people of the narrative, the ziggurat, the leadership class, this disgusting leadership class that really just wants to milk everybody in the West, milk them dry, and then send them to the slaughter. Those people have a vested interest in discrediting anybody in the dissidents community. I mean, in my own case, for instance, you know, I've said that I'm an author, and I've said that I'm a filmmaker, which is true. There's lots of evidence about that, you know, and the fucking books exist, right? And so the people of the narrative have tried to discredit me by saying, oh, he's not really an author, and then it's fucking there, and there are copies floating around of the books I've written and shit. And so now their tactic is to say that I'm an anti-Semite, okay? But you see what's going on. It's all an effort to discredit. They can't call me a racist because I'm a Latino, cabrón. I be Latino.
Yeah, it's similar with if you remember, Putin has been discredited several times, or all the time with his denouncing of the Ukrainian regime of being Nazis, right? And it makes no fucking sense because Zelensky is a Jew and so on. And he has said something very interesting, and I'm quite sure that the reason why he is in prison is because of that. So they are effectively Nazis. Doesn't matter if Zelensky's Jew, what they have, the people they have hate towards are the Russians. And I cannot confirm that. He probably has more information on that. But what does make absolute sense to me is when he said that the people who have caused the color revolution, the orange revolution in Ukraine, were neo-Nazis. Why? Because just like in Nigeria recently, if you want to spark a revolution, you do that among the most extremists of that political sector which is supposed to cause a revolution, because they are the ones who are willing to use force and violence. So it makes absolute sense that at least those people were Nazis who have brought about the regime change in Ukraine. And insofar, I wouldn't find it much weird if the higher ups in the Ukrainian regimes are also Nazis towards the Russians and the Ukrainian Russians within Ukraine. One thing which you might wonder is, he also gave very interesting explanation of why the war has started the way it did, with, for example, the charge onto Kiev, for example, but you should watch that video yourself if you want to get thoroughly informed on that. But what you might wonder is why the hell Ukraine is so hellbent on having the whole country back and having Crimea back, for example, where 95% of the people who have been living in Crimea are ethnic Russians, and the whole eastern part are all more or less Ukrainian Russians, so why do they feel it's as just as it supposedly is to wage this war, for example, which they had provoked and the US had provoked to no small extent, and the separatists within the eastern Ukraine and, the Wagner group, for example, and the Ukrainian soldiers and so on have been fighting a quasi-war in that region since 2014, and thousands of people had died already, and hundreds of children had died as a consequence of Ukrainian shelling of the cities in eastern Ukraine. Hundreds and thousands of civilians, Ukrainian Russian civilians, had died in eastern Ukraine since the beginning of the war in the early 2010s or the mid 2010s. As a consequence of Ukrainian shelling of that region, So it's not particularly, and why would they do that? And how is it particularly obvious that, that they are so entitled to it? I'm not saying what the Russians are doing is right with regards to the invasion of Ukraine. It's not obvious to me that anything is right in that conflict whether it is what the Russians are doing or whether it is what the Ukrainians are doing. The only thing which I would want to purport is that it's understandable what's been going on, you know? Not in the sense that it's justified necessarily. Yes. And so, you know, you might wonder, like, could the Ukrainian higher-ups be Nazis? And, you know, like, to me at least it seems a possibility. But the speech that Putin has given that there are Nazis has been repeated endless times, as far as I can tell, in order to discredit Putin. You know, and make him appear as crazy and irrational and so on. So, just so you know.
I can't be racist. So they tried a little bit to paint me as a racist, and then they lit on the issue of me being an anti-Semite. It's just to discredit any dissidents. You gotta understand. And pushing lies into the dissidents community is an extremely effective method to do it, of poisoning the well.
Yeah, that's true. You know, that's the number one they do. They do it exactly this way. If they want to discredit anyone, well, they've been doing it all the time that way, and you know that. You know, they bring out some information in the past which has been dubious, or, you know, as I outlined before in the stream, with the whole issue around targeted individuals. You know, so many fake websites exist around that issue that you have to wonder why. Why do these obvious fake websites exist? And as I had mentioned before, I have for a fact interacted with a disinformation agent therefore, so for that reason alone, almost, I can tell, not just because I have also had similar experiences as actual targeted individuals, that I know that topic, but also because, you know, what I also forgot to mention before with regards to conspiracy theories is that one reason why I myself am more open towards these kind of rhetorics by now is because I have experienced now myself what the CIA, for example, is capable of creating and still holding under absolute secret. No? Like this fucking brain cloud interface system. So I know that if this shit is true, you know, brain cloud interface, then other stuff is child play in comparison, you know. So that's how I know that there must be other quote unquote conspiracy theories which are true.